Hey, folks, thanks for tuning in for another episode of the Brilliant Ones podcast. Have a special guest with me, Kristi Otto, CMO and co-founder of VClick 3D. Kristi, welcome.
Hello. Great to meet you. Thanks for having me on, Donnie.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, I'm super excited because you've done some really interesting things. I mean, being, CEO of Inspire Living, right? The things that you're doing at VClick 3D, and then your consultant agency. I'm super excited to dive in. And, I always start this off, but since I'm in Austin, Texas, and this is a great place. And I know you, just looking at your background, you went to school up north in D.C.
Well, actually, I went to college in Arizona.
Okay.
I'm OG Texan.
Okay.
And I went to college in Arizona and got a master's at Thunderbird. And then I ended up on the East Coast after I got married, which I swore I would never go. But that's where I ended up. So never say never. That's lesson number one, right?
Right.
So during COVID, I sold my house in Virginia, and we own we used to own a large ranch that had been in the family for 100 years here in Texas, and decided to sell. My brother wanted to retire. He was kind of running it for us, and nobody else wanted to come take up the mantle. So I came back to kind of help with that, and just ended up in Austin, mostly for the tech scene, because that's obviously been a focus of ours. So I decided to come back to Texas.
Nice. So did you go to school in Washington? I read that you went to American University.
I did a study at American University. Yes, way back when. So I did do that. It was only one semester.
Oh, one semester.
Yeah,
Okay.
One semester.
So how did you get into IT?
I met and started working with, I've always worked with inventors and idea people. I did consulting for a while through one of the big, I think they called it the six-pack at the time, the accounting consulting firms. They kept merging. And I ended up always working with these entrepreneurs, and some of them were highly creative, and I started working with them doing consulting. And then just the big ideas, I loved it. So I met a gentleman through family of probably about 15 years ago who had big idea, right, and wanted help. And of course, that's just, a siren calling for me. It's like, I'm in, let's talk.
Yeah, right.
So we kind of started working together, and all three of these companies are based around some of his ideas. And he's not a little idea guy. He's a big idea guy. So everything that we have worked on has been just slightly ahead of the time. The first company, Guarded, was in portable safety and security. So that the idea was, instead of having secure zones in your house where you can't turn off the security system, you have to turn it off to open a door or a window. So this was being able to secure a window and have it open, right? And if anything moved, it would notify you on your phone. And this, by the way, was before the Apple phone came out.
Wow, so this is like early 2010-ish?
2010. Yeah, this is way early. And it was exciting stuff, right? And it kept morphing, and it was all about portable security. So we ended up launching that company right at the last economic downturn in 2008. So we've been through this before, right? We had a $4 million funder. We had distributors all over the country. We had like 20,000 customers lined up. I mean, we were rocking and rolling. Our funder lost their money.
Wow.
When the downturn hit. So that was a big lesson on how to pivot and back out of that, and kind of, what do you do?
Right.
That was, so we ended up, all of the product that we had, we delivered. We ended up, today, I mean, long story, there's a whole long story behind it, but we licensed that technology. So when you have your security products like Ring and Simply Safe and all those guys, some of the core technology was licensed from us.
Wow.
So it was kind of a long way about that, but that's where that, portable security became ubiquitous.
Nice.
So that, I got started, doing that. Early on, I worked with a gentleman who designed for Johnson and Johnson. He designed the paper gowns and some of the paper products. And we developed a portable pop-up tent for the beach using the UV fabric. And that was the first of its kind when those came out. That was a long time ago. I don't think they make those anymore at all. But so I've always been drawn to, here's this idea. Let's strategize on how to make it work. How do we take it from here to there? And is it going to work? And I've learned you never end up where you think you are. And, you start out here, but you never go the direction you think it's going to go, right? It always iterates and you end up somewhere else completely. But that's kind of how I got started.
Gotcha. So what was the next big idea you pivoted to?
Well, while we were working with Guardit, Inspire Living, and I always take conversations with people because you never know where they're going to lead. And you're like, why are we being introduced to these people? We were introduced to Project Hope, which is a global nonprofit organization. They do a lot of healthcare around the world. They actually had the boat, one of the big ships that was a hospital ship around the world. So, and I'm like, why? Okay. Absolutely, we'll have this conversation. Didn't really know why we were being introduced. It was kind of a one-off. And we always ask the question, what's your biggest problem, right? What's the problem you're trying to solve? And one of the healthcare workers that was in the meeting said, child pneumonia. Child pneumonia is the number one killer of children around the world. Did not know that, right? We weren't working in developing countries. We weren't working around the world, but that's one of the biggest problems. And it was because they misdiagnose. They have a hard time counting baby's breath rate to determine whether they have pneumonia or not. So they're doing it visually. And babies that have respiratory illness or pneumonia, 90 breaths a minute is impossible to count visually. So we ended up experimenting with a sensor that I told you about for Guardit. It's a sensor that you put on anything, and if it moves, it'll tell you that it moves.
Right.
But we applied that. How would this work on a baby? And counting the breath rates digitally, right, instead of visually, which, the error was massive. And so we experimented. We kept having conversations with them about this. They got a team involved. There were a lot of obstacles because you have to really understand the organizations you're talking to and what their mission is. This was a one-off for them, but this became a global problem and part of the World Health Organization's goals. They have I think it was the Millennium Goals. So it started getting bigger. We started working with UNICEF and a lot of the larger global NGOs, developing a device that would strap around a baby. And one of the things that we found out, you can't just digitally count breath rate. You have to determine all these other factors because there's a settling period. So if a baby's crying or they've sat up, your heart rate has to settle before you can get an accurate heart rate count. And when babies are small, the margin of sick or not, depending on their age, can be 5 breaths a minute. I mean, it's very small depending on how old they are. So it's important to get it right. So we kept working on this project, and we actually got recognized by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, UNICEF, and I forgot the other organization for being a global product that could really make a huge difference in global health. We ended up testing it, doing some field testing in Malawi. What ended up happening with that is the Project Hope got a new CEO, and they decided they didn't know where to put this. It wasn't part of his mission. And the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation at the time pivoted to focusing on vaccines. That became the big focus in the world, which they haven't.
Right.
They haven't. That still is, right?
Right.
Everybody sort of felt like frontline devices weren't as important. They've since shifted back, saying that it actually is. But at the time, they just decided, it was great, but we're not going to pursue that. I was pushing at the time too of how to use this in the Western world, if you will, as a telemedicine device. This was obviously pre-COVID, and telemedicine was very difficult to push, right? Because there were a lot of state-by-state regulations. People had been trying to get telemedicine to be a U.S. thing for a long time, right? So there was this resistance to having anything like that, other than maybe the NICU units and things like that. So that was a challenge, right? I think going into the medical device development is I think almost twice as hard as doing any other kind of startup,
Right.
because you have the huge regulatory hurdle that you have to, there's like 2 hurdles to get over. But once you're in, right? We decided at the time, when the NGOs kind of decided not to do that, which was a shame, because we had developed a way for the NGOs to make money without, we were going to do a revenue share, right, for the product, so that revenue would go into their coffers, because that's what they do, is grants and fundraising. And then, other revenue would go into ours for doing more R&D. We kind of figured out how to set up this joint effort, right? And we were excited about doing that globally, but Project Hope at the time decided it wasn't something that they wanted to pursue, because they had a new CEO. And like I said, sort of the global shift happened.
Right.
And then there was a lot of resistance on the telemedicine side. So we kind of took that and said, well, I think we're gonna shelve this, just because of the level of resistance. You've kind of, for me, it's how hard do you want to push that ball uphill? And I think I could have pushed it harder, but I think one of the lessons you learn as an entrepreneur is your capacity for working into these on a startup, right? Right. So I had, stuff going on at home.
Right.
My son got sick, and so I was like, I can't. This is something we're going to we can come back to it, because global health is always going to be an issue, but especially child pneumonia. So
right. So to back up, so how were you all able initially, when you all started testing, to find babies to test on? Like, what's that? How does that process look?
The nonprofit, they do field work.
Okay.
So they go out into the field all the time, and they are giving training to frontline healthcare workers. They're doing, delivering medical supplies. So we had a grant through USAID to do field testing. So that was all on their shoulders. We did some here in clinics, but they weren't, extensive tests. I mean, this was external, so it was not as difficult of a test as if you were trying to do something internal or testing on the skin. I mean, this was just a device that sat on the baby. So,
right.
you get parents' permission and a doctor's office that would agree to that. But most of that was done through the nonprofit.
So, do you think there is going to be ever a way to pick it back up?
I think we could. Yes. It would have to be, one of the things that I personally didn't, in the U.S. in healthcare, they want devices that continuously order, right? And they're very big on hygiene, so it's throwaway pieces, right? You might use an item and throw it away like a patch. You can't really do that internationally, because they don't have the capacity to dispose of it. Or if the equipment breaks, a lot of these countries have medical equipment that sits and nobody can repair it,
Right.
and they're not going to send it back. So I think the whole idea would have to be thought out differently. I know there's a level of interest. I know there's another group that was trying it for something else. They were trying to use it for detecting fevers and things like that. As the technology advances and has advanced, the products shift. They get smaller, they get smarter. And I think there would be in the future for us to pick that up. But I'm clearly suffer from serial entrepreneur disease. So I think at the time when we did that, we pushed it as far as we could with the technology. And like I said, I had other things that were pulling on my plate.
Right.
And when we got the field testing done, and then everybody kind of said, okay, we're going to regroup and shift, and this is the direction we're going to go. I kind of said, all right, we'll put this down for now and come back later. I think had we been closer to COVID when we did that with telemedicine took off like that.
Right.
As soon as COVID hit, it was like, okay, we're going to just ease all the restrictions. And this is, boom, all of a sudden telemedicine is here. So it would be a very different story. And I think there's still a need for devices like Inspire, because we were taking 5 measurements on a baby. So it was heart rate, temperature, position, whether they were cold or clammy, because that it's stress testing on the skin. So you get a far more accurate reading of all these diagnostics going on with the baby, and then you could actually send those to the doctor. There's a whole other protocol that has to go into responsibility with who's with the data, right? Who's making the decisions about the data. So that's, medically, but, I think in the future there might be.
So this was over a course of a couple of years, I'm assuming.
This was over a course of about 3 years.
3 years.
Yeah, that we pushed that through, 3 to 4 years.
So when did you say, okay, this doesn't work? What did you already, whatever you were going through, right? You had some, stuff that you were going through. Did you at that point say, okay, let me just take a break? Or did you were already thinking about the next idea?
I took a break.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I had to take a bit of a break because I had some personal stuff, and I think that's something you have to weigh when you're trying to do a company. When I had like 3 things where it all kind of wound down and you kind of get into a,
right,
sort of that lull, it kind of, your bell curve comes down and you're like, okay, I've got all these other things pulling at me. I need to, clearly the lesson was I need to stop and, pay attention to what was going on at home. So, so we did that. I got involved with VClick because it was something that, again, this gentleman, Mike Script, who's, he's the idea guy, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, he had somebody come to him and say, Verizon's having this problem with bandwidth. We were in safety and security with Guardit, the first product. So the industry was known to him, and I worked with him on that. So he started looking at the video surveillance side of it, and coming up with a solution that was different, because compression is in all the cameras, but the more data, the more IoT data and cameras that go up on any kind of network, the connectivity, those IoT devices don't ever come off. So you're building up more and more bandwidth. So it's how do we solve this problem? And that's an entrepreneur's mantra, right? What's the problem? What's your pain point? Let's try to solve it. So he started experimenting with that and came up with an idea. We already had a relationship with Virginia Tech. We tested a lot of our ideas through Virginia Tech for some of the professors and departments at Virginia Tech. So he took this idea down to Virginia Tech, and especially one of the guys that worked on Inspire, right? He was a teacher there, but he helped develop the Inspire device. And they just kind of ripped it apart, right? It's like, you can't, he was like, this is ridiculous because we're looking at a scene the way a computer would. So in video surveillance, you have cameras everywhere looking all the time, and they're eating up a ton of data. So we looked at it differently and said, how would the computer look at it? Mike scripted. So they did the math, his math checked out, and he was able to build an algorithm that actually sits at the edge, can look at a scene and reduce the bandwidth at the edge to 0, but maintain 100% of the evidentiary information.
Wow.
So it sounds counterintuitive, and this is why some of the professors just went, this is insane. There's too much data.
Yeah.
But when the head of the department looked and said, wait a minute, this math is right. This math all comes out to 0. So we built it, tested out. It absolutely worked, comes to 0. We tested that on the Verizon labs, and frame for frame, we had one video surveillance camera set up, just normal, and another video surveillance camera set up with a controller with our software in it. And the regular camera was 4.8 gigabytes, and ours was 158 megabytes. And it was the exact same information that we could replay.
Wow.
So, for me, I got back involved with this. I didn't really understand how some of this was working, right? And they wanted me to come back and work with them. But what did it for me was, this was when we first landed on Mars. This was like in 2019, I think, when the pictures first came out, the first Mars pictures. I had a family member killed in Denver, and they showed us surveillance footage, right, trying to capture, trying to find the perpetrator.
Right.
And they're grainy and they're blurry, right? It's the normal stuff that you kind of see because they ratchet down the frame rates on some of these cameras if they're running all the time, just
because they're running 24. So that explains a lot. So that's why a lot of surveillance footage
is grainy.
It's very grainy. It's hard to look at just because they're running 24/7. Right. And so it can't be high definition because that's going to take up too much bandwidth.
Right. So they'll reduce the frame rate, or they play all kinds of games. And then the same day, I saw pictures from Mars that were clear as a bell. Right. I know I'm comparing a little bit of apples to oranges but I'm like, you're taking all these photos in space. We're taking images that are, 50 yards away or less, and we can't get clear images. So, that kind of drove me to come back in and say, yeah, let's make this thing work. Where it's actually taken us is normal compression sits in all of the cameras. You only have a limited amount of compression that you can keep, doing these packets of data and transmitting them. So we've taken this algorithm into what the future will be. There's more and more 3D cameras and devices. The volumetric data, right? When you get into gaming, when you get into, your iPhone has a 3D camera on it. This is kind of the answer to the compression of 2D of a regular video camera. This is in the 3D space. We're able to reduce the bandwidth at the edge in the volumetric and 3D space so that you can add more analytics, you can push data to the cloud, you can get analytics back and forth, because that's a real choke point right now.
Right.
Is being able to, like in video surveillance, they've been late to the game in moving to the cloud. There's a big push. They've been doing it over the last few years, but there's a choke point. There's only so much you can do. So, bandwidth is a problem everywhere just because everybody wants to be on the
everyone wants to be
I mean, you go home and if you have a security camera at home, you know that if you turn it on, you're getting the wheel on your laptop, right?
Right.
Because You only have so much bandwidth.
So is this would this technology be able to improve the quality of video surveillance?
Yes. Yes, it will improve. You can, what we've been able to do is retrofit these cameras so that you immediately get a bandwidth reduction and you can raise the frame rate. You can either raise the frame rate or add new analytics, whatever it is you want to do. Our goal is building this platform. It's a sensory communication platform, and to add 3D analytics. So when you add in 3D, you obviously get richer data, right? And you have a level of compliance, especially in law enforcement. It's part of what can I take to court? Real evidence that hasn't been manipulated. There's kind of a chain of custody for that. But you can definitely utilize your infrastructure better, raise the frame rate of the camera, and it's more efficient.
Right.
And helping on the sustainability and energy level. But it's also going to be really important for smart cities, because you have so many things running in smart cities between, the water sensors, the environmental sensors, public safety. There's a lot going on there.
Right. Tons of use cases.
Mm-hmm.
So as the chief marketing officer, how do you plan to take this to market?
Well, what we've done, we were really focused on retrofit kits to kind of prove the point, because, a lot of people said when you tell them what it does, they're like, nah, no way.
What's a retrofit kit?
A retrofit is off the shelf box that has a controller in it that we have our software in, so that we can attach it and plug it in to a camera and lower the bandwidth and capture the data that the camera sees. So we use the camera image almost as a validation, right? We need the camera, but the 3D doesn't need to see the image, right?
Right.
But a lot of analytics are on the images. But our goal is to develop and to get a developer community involved for 3D analytics, because you're able to do analytics on more things than you had to be able to do with 2D. So, for example, we have a video of one of our programmers who has a dog, and he had a backpack behind him. And when you look at the camera, you don't see any of that, right? If you've got the video camera running, you couldn't see it. But with our sensor, we picked up what was right behind him. So, now you can add analytics to kind of start doing some of those things. Or, they're doing a lot of AI and analytics trying to determine what's in people's pockets and things like that.
Yeah, that'd be a great tool.
But it kind of opens up the new possibilities for analytics.
Nice.
In different realms.
Right. So what's been so far the feedback from the developing community?
Oh, the developer community was off the hook. We got, I think the CEO, he just kind of hinted, right? And there were like 30,000 people that were like signed up.
Wow.
He said it was kind of overwhelming. So on that sense, that's been really great. The software itself, we've been showing it. It's version 2.0 right now. So we're getting to the point where we can sort of hand it to people to play with. We haven't done that yet. We've been building the IP around it. There's some very big players that we're reaching out to now that are very interested in it. So
nice. And so what have you all started? I'm assuming you all have started raising money.
I'm in the process. Yeah, we did a bit of a pivot, and we're looking to do IP licensing. As opposed to just selling, we were trying to get out there with the retrofit kit, which we are, but the platform licensing of the IP is really what we're focused on. So a bigger company can license it and then develop under it for whatever they need it for.
Yeah.
It's kind of, I look at it more like co-development. We don't have to develop everything. And,
right.
It wouldn't get developed fast enough, right, for the needs that are out there right now. One of the bigger companies that we're talking to They have gobs of products that they could put it in. That they're interested in, so that and they've got development teams specific for their case studies, and the developers out here can develop for a bunch of other things. There's no limit to being able to develop in the 3D space. So we are focusing a lot more on the, talking and negotiating on the licensing side right now.
Gotcha. So would that require you all to go after like seed funding or Series A?
Well, this is the discussion I have in Austin. Seed funding can be up to $5 million or maybe a little more, right? So we're trying to keep it within the seed funding stage.
Gotcha.
To maintain some value. When you say, it depends on who you're talking to,
yeah,
right? Because
right.
some of the VCs, if you're at $5 million, they don't even, that's not enough, right?
Yeah.
They're over on the bigger side. But yeah, we're trying to raise $5 million right now.
Gotcha. So how has the Austin ecosystem been beneficial in growing the company?
The contact base and the willingness to make introductions has really been outstanding. We did the other 2 startups on the East Coast, little different atmosphere, right? It's also different markets. So the medical market's different than safety and security, but I think the Austin market's been really awesome at making introductions and, just kind of opening up and having the discussions. Lot of great investors here that are willing to talk. I mean, I know a lot of them came from Silicon Valley to here, but I think there's a bigger pool. Then they're a lot more open and writing checks, so to speak.
Right. Yeah. No. Austin's just a huge tech scene. It's attracting so much tech talent.
Yep.
A lot of companies have migrated down here. And it's very interesting to see. It's just like, oh man, so much is going on here.
Yeah, and even in the legal community, because we started talking about needing to negotiate on some of these licensing and finding people that can help with that. They've been awesome too.
Right.
I mean, and to finding all these people that actually have the skill set that you're looking for.
Yeah.
It's like a rich environment to be able to call through and say, who can I work best with?
Yeah.
And everybody's willing to kind of share the load. I think it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now, so what you also do as well is you consult startups as well?
Well, one of the things that I was doing, and during COVID, before I got fully involved, on VClick on a more regular basis, I noticed, and this is true for any entrepreneur today, you have to understand the market you're going out into, not just the segment, but the fact that the pace of change, the speed of change has accelerated since COVID. Everybody's felt it, but it's just constant chaos, right? Constant changes. Everything is just shifting quickly. I mean, you can see in the news how fast even the tech companies are pulling back and laying off. And
yeah, it's been a lot of layoffs.
Well, I mean, this is part and parcel. This is not, these changes aren't going to go away. So as an entrepreneur, you've got to move faster. You've got to be super flexible. But I was so focused on the innovation space that I felt there was a bit of a gap, because everybody, especially in the entrepreneur community, would focus on innovation, and companies were just innovation, right? And going after VC money like that was the only way. Right. It's not the only way. It's probably the hardest way. And I think there's a lot of unsung entrepreneurs that are doing it very slow and steady by the bootstraps, earning money as they go, that making solid businesses that are kind of the unsung heroes, right? It's the unicorns that get all the press.
Yeah.
But I think doing it, the old-fashioned way works. But I felt there was a gap between just innovation and really being able to make pivots. So a lot of companies that, in my peer group, if you will, they were struggling and didn't know why. So I actually went, and I'm a licensed or a certified reinvention practitioner.
So struggling in what the sense of just pivoting?
Keeping up, pivoting. What do we do? What do we
Right.
focus on? How do we, they were struggling with teams. They were just struggling across the board. And so what's happened is because the speed of change has hit us all, the old tools don't work. The old planning tools, you can't plan and lock it in. Like some of these big companies plan a budget and lock it in. And what happens when the market tanks? What happens when, a major catastrophe? Now you've got to go back and replan your budget. You can't stick to that. And I think having the ability to be flexible and having flexible infrastructure in place is really important. So it's something that I started focusing on, and it's really about it's new tools, right? It's facilitating the discussion on how do you plan in times of uncertainty, right? Which idea do you focus on, and how do you know which one, right? So it's really facilitating that kind of thing. It dovetails with what I've done in terms of a startup and working with innovators, and you have to iterate all the time. Any entrepreneur knows that. But this is a little bit more for people that have teams and teams that are struggling. It's turning fear into action. It's how to do that. How do you just thrive in times of uncertainty? I started doing some consulting with that. There's a kind of a global group that sort of started centering around reinvention, right? How do you make little tweaks that make a huge difference? And you keep doing that. The tools that we have all used in business were developed when your business cycles were at least 10 to 15 years, right? They're not anymore. I think our parents, it was 20 years. You go to work at a company for your entire life. Right. You retire, you get a watch, and those days are gone, right? Yeah. The life cycle has shifted from 15 years to 7 years, and now, depending on your industry, it's 1 to 2 years that you have to reinvent in your business, or you're dead. You're absolutely dead in the water.
Yeah.
So this was it started as there's a woman who started this, and I'm going to mess up her last name, Nadia. Oh God, I'm going to mess up her last name. I want to say Zhebrevnev, but I know that's not right, and I apologize. I can get more information, but it's all about reinvention. If you look up reinvention, you will find her. She started this movement, and we were some of the early experimenters with all of these tools, and they've really turned out to be fantastic, and helping people really wrap their mind around getting comfortable with change all the time, being flexible, how you plan in times of crisis. I mean,
right. Uncertainty.
I think the new word for the year that came out a few days ago is permacrisis.
Never heard that one.
Because it feels that way a little bit. There's always something constantly, just like, it feels unstable.
Yeah.
There's a war here, there's inflation there, there's, all this stuff all the time. So how do you build your business? How do you build your business like that when the market could shift under your feet at any moment? Right. So these are really tools on how to facilitate whatever it is you're doing, and what your team is, what do you have now that you can work with, and move that forward and do it in a sustainable way and survive. One of the challenges that I've had over the last 6 months is the network of people that we've developed, and granted, we did a bit of a pivot, but I think it's really important to have a deep network now more than ever, because so many people, more people than ever, have left and gone on to do something else, which I don't know if a lot of people doing that, where they're
leave an industry and go to another industry?
Well, yeah, they're not doing I met them doing some legal work, and they're not doing that anymore. They leave and go do something else. So everybody's doing this self-reinvention, if you will.
Right.
But it's not just, it's like a ton of
a
people
lot
in
of
the
people are doing
network, and some, you're relying on them, and then they're like, oh, you know what, I'm just not going to do this anymore.
Yeah.
So you got to have a deep network, and I
Right.
think there's going to be more of that. And it's not necessarily that they got fired; it's that they want to go do something else.
And
Right.
so what do you think is the cause of that? Is it just
Exactly what I'm talking about. It's the constant change. It's
constant uncertainty?
it's understanding. I mean, we did work from home, and then everybody said, well, do I really have to come back in?
Right.
Right. And then there's groups that say, I really miss the in-person. I want to see my coworkers. And there's this push-pull. I think people are
Yeah.
assessing their quality of life and what they really want.
Yeah.
Right. How do you want to spend your time? I mean, COVID kind of reframed all of that for us.
Yeah.
So I think there's that going on still.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you can do a lot of companies are adapting like a hybrid environment, right? Come into the office a few days a week.
Yeah.
You think something like that is sustainable, or you think eventually that's going to change as well?
The hybrid?
Yeah, hybrid environment, like a lot of companies I've seen are reducing size as well. So
Yeah.
like a lot of them have reduced their office space.
Yep.
And it's just shrunk and, just kind of going smaller and then having people come into the office just a couple of days a week.
Yeah. Well, I think hybrid, I'm a big proponent that you get more done face to face. It's a different interaction. But depending on your job, I don't think you have to do that all the time. You can get a lot more focused work done in whatever work environment you might have. I mean, if you've got a lot of kids at home, you may want to go to the office.
Right.
But, I think the hybrid is a great solution. I think we figured out we don't need to sit and commute
We don't.
for 45 minutes one way every day.
Yeah.
Right? We'll save the time, save the gas.
Right.
There's a whole quality of life there. I think... that's the beauty of all this change, is that it's unsettling, but there's so much opportunity.
Yeah.
If you can turn off the negativity on the news.
Yeah. Turn the news off. Right.
Yeah. So I've done the consulting on the reinvention side, and facilitating teams, leadership. Like, what kind of qualities do you really have to have now as a leader? So what is the skill set? And a lot of the old skills they don't play in today's market. And I think that's why a lot of teams are having trouble.
Wow. So what in today's market, what are some skills that a leader should have?
They have to be vulnerable, and they have to be flexible. I think a lot of leaders, there's some leaders that this is how it's done. This is what you need to do. Follow the thing. It's great in the military, but even the military has flexibility. You've got to be able to say, I don't know if this is going to work, but let's try it. Let's experiment. You've got to be willing to fail and I use air quotes when I say fail, because it's about experimentation now. It's about having a vision and leading a team. Maybe you want to lead a movement, but like I said, you've got to be able to say, well, that didn't work. Let's go do something else. And I think you've got to meet people where they are as well.
Do you think this generation with Generation Z and millennials, is that easy to pivot to as far as like from a leader perspective, and it's hard to adapt out of other generations?
I think there's a gap in leadership training for a lot of people. I do. And that's where I see a lot of millennials and Gen Z. They really need some leadership development instead of, some of the old school was rather punitive, I think. And I don't think that works at all ever. But, it's about motivating. But I think they've got it figured out. I think there's a lot of adaptability in the younger generation. And I really think that everybody has to remember to put the tech down and look at the person, right? And that's what I mean by meeting people where they are. And I think there's a difference in, I can't speak for all the generation, but just, I think the millennials grew up with tech, so everything's based around tech. And I think Gen Z, they like that hybrid thing.
Yeah.
They want experiences.
They want experiences.
At least, that's what the surveys say.
Yeah. That's what the survey says.
Yeah, I think hybrid will be here to stay. I
Yeah.
think it's going to change and probably become something better.
Right.
But these are all growing pains.
Yeah.
It's sort of like COVID took the bowl of apples and dumped it in the table. And it's like, what do we do with it?
Right.
Everything is in turmoil. But it as unsettling, again, as I said, unsettling as it is, it's really a great opportunity.
Right.
So, and it's like what you were talking about, the shift when the boomers retire, all these businesses that we've all taken for granted.
Right. That's what I was telling you about.
What's going to happen to them, know, because there's a whole generation just focused on so much on tech, but tech doesn't solve my plumbing problem.
Right.
Yeah,
that's what I identified. Like a lot of these home service businesses are just not up to date when it comes down to from a technology perspective.
Right.
And I think this is a huge opportunity in that market. It's a big market.
It's a big market.
Yeah.
Right. They had a stable of customers they've always had. They built over the years. They didn't need to really put any tech into it. So I think that combination is going to be really powerful.
Yeah.
I think there's I want to say the trailer park is here outside of Austin, where they bought the trailer park and put in all these new amenities. A swimming pool and a park and all this stuff for kids, really made it nice. And then they added a tech feature where you could make a reservation ahead of coming and all this other stuff. And they have been killing it. I think it's out on the way to Green. I think it's out towards San Antonio. I think it's out that way.
Cool.
There's things like that are just really exciting, and that's just looking at all of those businesses with a whole new lens.
Yeah, I think I'm looking forward to diving deeper into it and kind of getting started. So I'm super excited about it.
Yeah.
So, but as we wrap up, I always ask this question to my guest. As we spoke about reinventing, sorry, and what how entrepreneurs need to keep up with, obviously how business life cycles and so forth. What advice would you give entrepreneurs during this time of crisis?
Well, it's really maintaining flexibility. But for me, one of the things that's been really important that makes a huge difference with every single startup that we've done is picking your team really carefully. And if there's a team member that's just not really jiving, a bad team member will bring down the whole thing, So if you're looking at all A players and you've got a B and C team member, and I use those terms depending on skill set and what you're looking for, but you got to take the B and C because you will go further than if you have a bad apple on the team. It's like they say when you go crabbing, right? You put a crab in a bucket, you're supposed to put 2 in the bucket.
Right.
Because if you put 1 in the bucket, 1 will crawl out. If you put 2 in the bucket, the other one will pull the crab down, right? That's what a bad team member will do. It'll pull the entire team down and do it fast. And we learned that twice, the hard way.
Right.
and you pick carefully, pick slow, and fire fast, because it makes a huge difference in just morale and speed and everything that you can get accomplished. That would be my number one thing, is carefully picking who you choose to work with.
Awesome. No, well, thanks for that, Kristi. Really appreciate you joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I enjoy it. Thanks.
All right. Yep.